Scott Peterson. On April 13, 2003, the remains of an unborn child washed ashore along the eastern edge of San Francisco Bay, near the city of Richmond. The following day, a woman's body surfaced nearby. Both were recovered within sight of the Berkeley Marina, the exact location where a man named Scott Peterson claimed he had gone fishing the day his pregnant wife vanished. What nobody knew at the time was that this ordinary-looking fertilizer salesman from Modesto had been constructing a web of lies for months, and the bay he chose for his alibi would become the place that undid him. Modesto, California, 2002. Scott Lee Peterson was 29, married to Lacey Denise Peterson, 27, and the two were expecting their first child, a boy they planned to name Connor. Lacey was 8 months pregnant. Scott sold fertilizer for a company called Trade Corp. By every outward appearance, they were a young couple settling into the next stage of life. On Christmas Eve, December 24, 2002, Lacey disappeared from their Modesto home. Peterson told police he had spent the morning fishing alone at the Berkeley Marina, roughly 90 miles west. A massive search followed, drawing national media attention and thousands of volunteers. Peterson appeared on camera during those early days, playing the concerned husband. Then came the fracture. On January 24, 2003, a Fresno massage therapist named Amber Frey contacted investigators and revealed she had been in a romantic relationship with Peterson since November 20th, weeks before Lacey disappeared. Frey told police that Peterson had informed her his wife was already gone, before Lacey was even reported missing. This detail was a warning sign. Investigators sharpened their focus on Peterson immediately. When Lacey's remains and those of her unborn son washed up in April, the geographic proximity to Peterson's stated fishing location gave prosecutors the anchor they needed. Peterson was arrested on April 18, 2003, in La Jolla, near the Mexican border. He was carrying roughly $15,000 in cash, his brother's driver's license, and had recently dyed his hair and grown a goatee. The arrest drew comparisons to a man preparing to flee, not a man waiting for answers. The trial was moved to Redwood City in San Mateo County on a change of venue after the court determined Peterson could not receive a fair trial in Stanislaus County. The prosecution, unable to present a cause of death or a specific crime scene, built its case on circumstantial evidence. Anchored by the geographic coincidence of the remains, the affair with Frey, and Peterson's behavior after the disappearance. Frey herself testified at length, playing recorded phone calls in which Peterson told her he was traveling abroad while the search for Lacey was happening miles from where he actually was. On November 12, 2004, a jury convicted him of first degree for Lacey and second degree for Connor. On March 16, 2005, Judge Alfred DeLucchi sentenced Peterson to death. He entered San Quentin's death row, where he would remain for the next 15 years. In August 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned the death sentence, ruling that potential jurors had been improperly excluded for their general views on capital punishment. A separate inquiry was ordered into whether juror number 7 had concealed her own prior involvement as a crime victim. Stanislaus County District Attorney Birgit Fladiger declined to seek death again. On December 8, 2021, Judge Anne Christine Masulo in San Mateo County sentenced Peterson to life without the possibility of parole, with a concurrent 15-to-life term for Connor. Masulo also denied a new trial motion in 2022, finding the jurors' omissions reflected a combination of misunderstanding and carelessness, not deliberate deception. Peterson was transferred to Mule Creek State Prison in Ione in October 2022, where he remains in 2025. In January 2024, the Los Angeles Innocence Project joined his defense and filed a habeas corpus petition citing alleged exculpatory evidence, including a burglary that occurred across the street from the Peterson home. and witness statements placing Lacey alive after Scott reportedly left. A judge denied DNA retesting on 13 items, but allowed limited testing on a piece of duct tape recovered from Lacey's clothing. That petition remains pending. Peterson, now 52, continues to maintain his innocence. The same fishing trip that served as his alibi became the prosecution's most damning detail. The thread that connected his story to the shoreline where his wife and son were found. And in the case that follows, another husband went on live television to beg for the return of his family, knowing exactly where they were. Chris Watts. On the evening of August 13, 2018, a soft-spoken oil field operator in Frederick, Colorado, sat in front of television cameras from 2 Denver stations and asked for help finding his wife and 2 little girls. He told KMGH he had left every light in the house on the night before, hoping the kids would just come running in. He told Denver 7 he and his wife had simply had an emotional conversation, and she had left. His composure was measured. His words were careful. And nearly every sentence was a lie. That was August 13th, 2018. By August 15th, he was under arrest. If you had asked anyone in Frederick about Chris Watts before that week, they would have told you he was steady, quiet, unremarkable. Born in 1985, he worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum, maintaining oil well sites across Weld County. His wife Shanann, 34, was a social media personality for a health supplement company and posted frequently about her family, sharing glimpses of birthday parties, vacations, and everyday moments with their daughters. They had 2 girls, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with a son they had planned to name Nico. What happened inside that house on August 13th shattered every assumption the community held. Watts took the lives of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. He transported their bodies to an Anadarko well site near Roggen, where he buried Shanann in a shallow grave and placed the girls' bodies inside crude oil storage tanks, each with an opening only 8 inches wide. The scope of what he did was staggering, not only in its violence, but in the calculated way he disposed of evidence before driving to work as though nothing had happened. The unraveling began the same day. A close friend of Shanann's, Nicole Atkinson, grew alarmed when Shanann did not respond to calls or show up for a doctor's appointment that morning. Atkinson drove to the house, found Shanann's car and purse still inside, and called police. Officers arrived at the Watts home that afternoon. Watts let them in and cooperated initially, but his story kept shifting. He claimed Shanann had left with the girls after their conversation, but he could not explain where they had gone or why she had left everything behind. Investigators quickly identified his affair with Anadarko colleague Nickel Kessinger, who had begun cooperating with police almost immediately. Phone records and GPS data placed Watts at the well site during the hours he claimed to have been at home. On August 15th, Watts agreed to take a polygraph examination and failed. Shortly afterward, sitting with his father Ronnie in an interview room, he confessed. This is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. There was no trial. On November 6, 2018, Watts pleaded guilty in Weld County District Court to 5 counts of first degree, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. Shanann's family asked prosecutors not to pursue the death penalty, wanting certainty and wanting to avoid a prolonged trial that would force them to relive every detail. On November 19, 2018, Judge Marcelo Kopkow imposed 5 consecutive and concurrent life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 48 years for the unlawful termination charge and 36 years for the tampering counts. During sentencing, Shanann's father, Frank Zuchek, addressed the courtroom. Her brother, Frankie, described the family's devastation. Watts himself sat mostly still, offering no statement beyond his guilty plea. Within weeks, The Colorado Department of Corrections transferred Watts out of state under the Interstate Corrections Compact for his own safety. He arrived at Dodge Correctional Institution in Walpoon, Wisconsin on December 5, 2018. He remains there in 2025. Corrections records indicate he has received 2 minor conduct violations in 2020 and 2021, and he has corresponded with an author who published portions of their letters in a 2019 book. Watts was the neighbor you would never suspect, the family man whose social media presence projected normalcy while something far darker was happening behind closed doors. But when the threat is not a husband or a neighbor, but a nurse inside the very institution designed to keep people alive, the damage can continue for years before anyone notices. And the man in the next case proved exactly how long. Charles Cullen. Then, on December 12, 2003, a registered nurse in central New Jersey was arrested outside a restaurant in Somerville. His closest colleague at Somerset Medical Center, a nurse named Amy Loughran, had agreed to wear a wire during a dinner meeting and helped draw out statements that finally gave prosecutors what they needed after 16 years of quiet devastation across 2 states. His name was Charles Cullen. He was 43 years old at the time of his arrest, and he had worked at 9 hospitals and 1 nursing home spanning New Jersey and Pennsylvania since graduating from nursing school in 1987. The confirmed number of patients whose lives he took stands at 29. Cullen himself has estimated roughly 40. Some researchers and journalists have speculated the total could be far higher, though those figures remain unconfirmed and should be understood as speculation, not established fact. It was 1987, and Cullen had just completed his training at Mountainside Hospital's School of Nursing. He was a Navy veteran who had served aboard the USS Woodrow Wilson, unremarkable by every institutional measure. His first confessed act occurred on June 11, 1988, at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. His method was consistent throughout the years that followed. He administered lethal doses of digoxin or insulin through IV bags, belonging to patients who were not under his care. You would think someone would have said something. Nobody did. Hospital after hospital either terminated Cullen quietly or accepted his resignation without comment, then passed him along with neutral references to avoid the risk of a defamation lawsuit. He cycled through St. Barnabas, Warren Hospital, Hunterdon Medical Center, Morristown Memorial, Liberty Nursing Center, Easton Hospital in Pennsylvania, Lehigh Valley Hospital, St. Luke's in Bethlehem, Sacred Heart in Allentown, and finally, Somerset Medical Center in Somerville. At several of these facilities, internal reviews flagged spikes in patient deaths during his shifts. At others, co-workers reported suspicious behavior. And in every case, the institution chose self-protection over investigation, opting to move Cullen out rather than report him to licensing authorities or law enforcement. The system that was supposed to protect patients instead protected itself, and the cost was measured in lives. Suspicions crystallized at Somerset in mid-2003, when toxicology consultations and irregularities in the Pyxis automated medication dispensing system flagged patterns that could no longer be ignored. The Somerset County prosecutor opened a criminal investigation in October of that year. Loughran, who had grown close to Cullen personally and considered him a friend, was faced with a difficult choice. She agreed to cooperate. She wore a wire during a meeting with Cullen at a Bridgewater, New Jersey restaurant. And over the course of the conversation, Cullen made statements that gave investigators what they needed. He was arrested on December 12, 2003, in a plea agreement designed to identify as many victims as possible while removing the death penalty from consideration. Cullen pleaded guilty in New Jersey to 22 counts of taking a life and 3 counts of attempted, and in Pennsylvania to 7 and 3 attempted. On March 2, 2006, Somerset County Superior Court Judge Paul Armstrong sentenced him to 11 consecutive life terms, establishing a minimum incarceration period of 397 years. His parole eligibility date, as listed on the New Jersey Department of Corrections website, is June 10, 2388. That is not a typo, by the way. Judge Armstrong addressed Cullen directly during sentencing, telling him he had betrayed the ancient foundations of the healing professions. Cullen sat with his eyes closed as families of victims spoke. One family member, Richard Stucker, noted that Cullen could not even bring himself to look toward the gallery. The case prompted two pieces of New Jersey legislation: the 2004 Patient Safety Act and the 2005 Healthcare Professional Responsibility and Reporting Enhancement Act. Both intended to close the institutional gaps that allowed one nurse to move across 10 facilities over 16 years without meaningful scrutiny. Cullen, 65 in 2025, remains incarcerated at New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. Up to this point, every case has involved someone embedded in a family or a trusted institution. That pattern was about to flip. The man in the next case wore a uniform, flew military helicopters, and raised 5 children in a quiet Spokane neighborhood while leading a parallel life that stretched back more than 20 years. Robert Yates. Robert Yates was a husband, a father of 5, and a decorated Army National Guard helicopter pilot who had served on active duty from 1977 through 1996, with deployments to Germany, Somalia, and Haiti. After transitioning to the National Guard, he settled into civilian life in Spokane, Washington, working at a local aluminum plant. His neighbors knew him as a dependable family man. He attended church, participated in community events, and raised his children in a quiet residential neighborhood. At least, that's what everyone thought. Between 1975 and 1998, Yates is connected to at least 13 and as many as 16 lives taken across Washington state. The earliest suspected case is a 1975 double homicide in Walla Walla involving 2 college students, Patrick Oliver and Susan Savage, though Yates was never formally charged in their deaths. An additional victim, Stacy Hawn, was found in Skagit County in July 1988 and has also been linked to Yates. The concentrated period of violence ran from 1996 through 1998, when at least 11 women, most of them working along East Sprague Avenue in Spokane, lost their lives. The pattern was consistent and deliberate. Yates would approach victims in his white Corvette or a 1970s Ford van, and they were typically found in rural fields east of Spokane, often with plastic grocery bags placed over their heads, a detail that led investigators to call him the grocery bag killer. One victim, Melody Murfin, last seen in May 1998, was buried directly beneath the window of Yates's own bedroom at his family home. Her remains were not recovered until 6 months after his arrest. In 2 other cases, victims were found in Pierce County, roughly 300 miles from Spokane, expanding the geographic scope of his crimes significantly. Everything was in place for investigators. They just did not know what everything was building toward. A witness linked Yates's white Corvette to one of the victims, 16-year-old Jennifer Joseph, and Spokane police pulled him over on a traffic stop in September 1998. Yates refused to provide a DNA sample, and without enough evidence to compel one, officers had to let him go. For the next 18 months, the case stalled while the task force continued to build a circumstantial case. Then, in April 2000, forensic analysis matched DNA recovered from Joseph's body to biological evidence found inside his Corvette, and Yates was arrested on April 18, 2000. To avoid the death penalty in Spokane County, Yates pleaded guilty on October 19, 2000, to 13 counts of first degree and 1 count of attempted first degree. 6 days later, Judge Richard Schroeder sentenced him to 408 years. But Pierce County where the Mercer and Ellis cases remained open, refused to honor the Spokane Agreement. Yates was tried separately there in 2002, convicted of both, and on October 4, 2002, sentenced to death. The legal proceedings stretched across more than a decade. The Washington Supreme Court upheld the death sentence in 2007 and affirmed the Spokane plea in a separate ruling in 2014. Then, on October 11, 2018, Washington state abolished capital punishment entirely through the ruling in State v. Gregory, and Yates's death sentence was automatically commuted to life without the possibility of parole. As of 2025, Robert Yates, 73 years old, remains incarcerated at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, the same city where his earliest suspected crimes occurred half a century earlier. He will spend the rest of his life there. The families of the women whose lives he took along East Sprague Avenue have largely stayed out of the public eye. But the case reshaped how Spokane's law enforcement approached cases involving vulnerable populations in the years that followed. For more than 2 decades, Yates had maintained the outward appearance of a man dedicated to service, to family, and to his country. The investigation revealed something else entirely. Everything Yates had built, the military career, the family, the community standing, worked against him once investigators identified the vehicle that connected him to his victims. And in the case that comes next, it was also a vehicle that started everything. A routine traffic stop on a California interstate, and a body still in the passenger seat. Randy Kraft. At approximately 1:10 in the morning on May 14, 1983, California Highway Patrol officers pulled over a car drifting erratically along Interstate 5 near Mission Viejo. The driver was polite and cooperative. The passenger was a 25-year-old Marine named Terry Lee Gambrill. He was already gone, strangled, still slumped in the seat beside the driver. But that roadside discovery would turn out to be only the surface of something far larger. 14 years before that traffic stop, Randy Kraft had been a different person entirely. He was a Claremont Men's College graduate with a degree in economics, a former Air Force enlistee, and a computer programmer working for a defense contractor called Lear Siegler. He lived in Long Beach. He was articulate and educated. Nothing in his professional profile suggested what investigators would find inside his car and his home. Searches turned up roughly 47 Polaroid photographs of young men who appeared to be unconscious or deceased, along with personal belongings linked to multiple missing persons and a coded list written on a yellow legal pad. The list contained 61 entries, each one a cryptic shorthand, words like stable, dog, and deodorant. Investigators came to believe that each entry corresponded to a specific victim, and over the following months, detectives matched several entries to known cases based on locations, physical descriptions, and dates. Kraft denied this entirely, claiming the list documented a housewarming party. Investigators considered that explanation implausible given how closely the entries aligned with the details of confirmed homicides. That list became the centerpiece of one of the most sprawling serial investigations in California history, and gave Kraft his eventual name in the press, the Scorecard Killer. Kraft is believed to have taken the lives of at least 16 young men, the number he was ultimately convicted of. But investigators suspect the true count may reach 65 to 67, spanning from 1971 to 1983 across California, Oregon, and Michigan. Most of the victims were young, often Marines or hitchhikers, drugged with sedatives and alcohol, harmed, and left along freeways. The Scorecard Killer nickname also overlapped with 2 other serial offenders operating in Southern California during the same era, William Bonin and Patrick Kearney, all 3 of whom were called the Freeway Killer at various points during the investigations. The full scope of the evidence recovered in this case rarely makes it into public discussions, but the volume of physical material was staggering. His trial in Orange County before Judge Donald McCartan began in September 1988 and lasted nearly 13 months, making it the longest and most expensive criminal trial in California history at the time. More than 1,600 exhibits were presented to the jury, including the Polaroids, the coded list, fibers, and toxicology reports linking Kraft to victim after victim. The sheer volume of evidence required the prosecution to connect each of the 16 charged deaths individually, walking the jury through timelines, forensic matches, and geographic patterns that stretched across more than a decade. On May 12, 1989, the jury convicted Kraft of 16 counts. Jurors recommended death on August 11, 1989, and Judge McCartan imposed the sentence formally on November 29th. The California Supreme Court affirmed the conviction and death sentence on August 11, 2000. Federal habeas litigation continues to this day. California has not carried out an execution since 2006, and Governor Gavin Newsom imposed a formal moratorium in March 2019. Kraft, 80 years old in 2025, remains on death row at San Quentin, which under Newsom's 2022 plan is being converted into a rehabilitation center. That conversion will eventually require Kraft's transfer to another facility, and the case continues to produce new findings decades later. In May 2025, Oregon State Police announced that a man named Larry Eugene Parks, 30 years old when his body was found along Interstate 5 in 1980, had been identified through forensic genealogy as a likely Kraft victim. It was the second cold case identification tied to Kraft in recent years, following the 2023 identification of a teenager from Iowa. As of 2025, Randy Kraft has spent more than 4 decades on death row. The coded list recovered from his home has never been fully deciphered, and investigators believe several of its entries still correspond to victims whose names remain unknown, with forensic genealogy now identifying new matches decades after the crimes. The list may yet yield more answers than anyone expected. If you like this video and haven't subscribed yet, now's a great time to join. We post a new case every day, so hit subscribe and don't miss what's coming next. Dorothea Puente. On November 11, 1988, Sacramento Police Detective John Cabrera and a team of officers began digging in the yard of a pale Victorian boarding house at 1426 F Street. They were looking for a missing tenant named Alvaro Montoya, a developmentally disabled man with schizophrenia whose social worker had filed a report when he stopped showing up. What they found beneath the soil was not one body, it was 7. But this story does not start with the excavation. It starts with the woman who ran the house, a 60-year-old landlord named Dorothea Puente, and a career of deception that stretched back decades. Puente was born Dorothea Helen Gray in 1929 in Redlands, California. By the time she opened the unlicensed boarding house on F Street in Sacramento, she already had a substantial criminal record stretching back to the late 1940s, including convictions for forgery, running a brothel, drugging and robbing an elderly pensioner, and federal check theft. She had served time in federal prison and in state facilities. She was operating the boarding house in direct violation of her parole conditions, but no one appeared to be monitoring her closely. Her tenants were vulnerable adults, many of them elderly or mentally ill, many receiving Social Security or disability benefits, and nearly all of them without family members checking in on their welfare. Between 1982 and 1988, Puente took the lives of at least 9 people. She drugged them with prescription sedatives, primarily Dalmane, and buried their remains in the yard while continuing to cash their government checks month after month. Among the confirmed victims were Ruth Monroe, 61, whose death in April 1982 was initially ruled a suicide, and Everson Gilmouth, 77, whose body was found in a wooden box along the Sacramento River in January 1986. Other victims included Betty Palmer, 78. Leona Carpenter, 78. James Gallup, 62. Vera Faye Martin, 64. Dorothy Miller, 64. And Benjamin Fink, 55. The youngest victim was Alvaro Montoya, 51, the man whose disappearance would eventually bring everything down. If Puente had stopped after the first few, this would be a very different story. She did not stop. The case broke open because of Montoya. His social worker, Judy Moyes, noticed he had vanished and filed a missing person report in November 1988. When Cabrera and his team arrived to search the property on November 11th, they found the first set of remains almost immediately. Over the following days, the excavation expanded and body after body was uncovered in the yard and garden. While officers continued to dig, a tenant named John Sharp slipped investigators a handwritten note warning that Puente wanted him to lie for her. Puente herself, remarkably composed throughout, asked police if she could leave the property briefly to get coffee at a nearby hotel. They let her go. She never came back. She fled to Los Angeles, where a retiree named Charles Wilges recognized her at a bar after seeing her face on the evening news. She was arrested at a motel on November 16, 1988, and flown back to Sacramento the following day. On March 31, 1989, she was charged with 9 counts of first degree with special circumstances, making the case eligible for the death penalty. The trial was moved to Monterey County on a change of venue and ran from February through August of 1993 before Judge Michael Verga. 156 witnesses testified. More than 3,100 exhibits were introduced. After 35 days of deliberation, the jury convicted Puente of 3 first-degree counts for the deaths of Benjamin Fink, Leona Carpenter, and Dorothy Miller. The jury deadlocked on the remaining 6 charges. A separate penalty phase also ended in a deadlock, and on October 13, 1993, Judge Verga imposed 2 consecutive life without parole terms plus a concurrent 15-to-life sentence, sparing Puente from the death penalty. She served her sentence at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, where she maintained her innocence until the end. In 2004, she co-authored a cookbook with writer Shane Bugbee. She passed away of natural causes on March 27, 2011, at the age of 82. The boarding house on F Street still stands in Midtown Sacramento. And somehow, it gets worse. Because while Puente targeted the vulnerable people living under her roof, the man in the next case used the entire internet as his stage. And a community of amateur investigators saw what was coming before anyone with a badge did. Luca Rocco Magnotta. In December of 2010, a video surfaced online showing a hooded figure suffocating 2 kittens inside a vacuum-sealed bag. The footage spread across animal welfare communities, and a small group of internet investigators, led by a Las Vegas data analyst and a Los Angeles writer, began tracking the uploader through metadata and digital footprints. Within weeks, they identified a man in Canada named Luca Rocco Magnotta, a failed model and minor adult film actor who had legally changed his name from Eric Clinton Kirk Newman in 2006. So why did a man already flagged by online communities for animal cruelty go on to commit one of the most notorious acts of violence in Canadian history, with no one in law enforcement intervening? 12 years before that video, in 2000, Magnotta had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. He was born Eric Clinton Kirk Newman in Scarborough, Toronto, in 1982. He drifted through a series of failed attempts at fame, including modeling auditions and relentless online self-promotion, rarely holding steady employment. The Facebook group of amateur sleuths who had identified him after the kitten videos, led by Las Vegas data analyst Deanna Thompson and Los Angeles writer John Green, contacted police and animal welfare authorities repeatedly. Their warnings went unheeded. No charges were filed. On May 24th or 25th, 2012, Magnotta lured 33-year-old Jun Lin, a Concordia University engineering student originally from Wuhan, China, to his Montreal apartment on Avenue Décarie. Magnotta took Lin's life, dismembered his remains, and recorded the act, uploading an 11-minute video to a shock website. In the days that followed, he mailed portions of Lin's remains to political party offices and schools across the country. A package containing Lin's left foot was sent to the Conservative Party of Canada. His right hand was mailed to False Creek Elementary in Vancouver. Additional packages were addressed to the Liberal Party offices and St. George's School in Vancouver. A janitor discovered Lin's torso in a suitcase behind the apartment building on May 29th. Lin's head was recovered weeks later in Angrignon Park. Interpol issued a red notice. On June 4, 2012, Magnotta was found at an internet cafe in Berlin's Neukölln district, sitting at a terminal, reading news coverage about himself. He was apprehended by German police and extradited to Canada on a Royal Canadian Air Force aircraft on June 18th. The trial before Quebec Superior Court Justice Guy Cournoyer began on September 29, 2014, and lasted 10 weeks. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, surveillance footage, and the online trail Magnotta had left before and after the act. Magnotta admitted to what he had done, but entered a plea of not criminally responsible due to mental disorder, arguing that his schizophrenia rendered him incapable of understanding the nature of his actions. Psychiatrists for both sides testified, offering sharply conflicting assessments of his mental state at the time. On December 23, 2014, after 8 days of deliberation, a jury of 8 women and 4 men rejected the defense and found him guilty on all 5 counts. First degree, criminally harassing the Prime Minister and other members of Parliament, committing indignity to a body, publishing obscene material, and mailing obscene material. He received the mandatory life sentence with no parole eligibility for 25 years on the first count, plus a concurrent 19 years on the remaining charges. He withdrew his appeal on February 18, 2015. Jun Lin's father, Diran Lin, delivered a victim impact statement during the proceedings, telling the court that in one night, the family had lost a lifetime of hope. The operator of the shock website where the video was hosted was later convicted in 2016 for corrupting public morals. As of 2025, Magnotta, 42 years old, is incarcerated at the medium-security Archambault institution in Saint-Anne-des-Plaines, Quebec, after being transferred from the maximum security facility at Port-Cartier. He will not be eligible for parole until 2037. The operator of the shock website where the video was originally hosted was convicted in 2016 for corrupting public morals. June 4, 2012. Magnotta was caught reading his own headlines in a Berlin internet cafe. That detail tells you something about the kind of person who treats violence as performance. The man in the next case also seemed to treat life as something disposable. His name appeared in society pages for decades, and 3 people connected to him were found dead across 3 different states. Robert Durst. Robert Durst was the eldest son of New York real estate magnate Seymour Durst, heir to one of Manhattan's most prominent property empires, the Durst Organization. He was estranged from the family business after his younger brother Douglas was chosen to lead it. He attended private schools, earned graduate degrees, and moved through the upper circles of New York wealth with the ease of someone born into enormous privilege. 20 years before his arrest, Durst was already linked to a disappearance, a suspected homicide, and a dismemberment. So how did someone with that much visibility end up living in a Texas rooming house disguised as a mute woman named Dorothy Senior? On January 31, 1982, Durst's first wife, Kathleen McCormick Durst, 29, a fourth-year medical student at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, disappeared from their weekend home in South Salem, New York. Durst told police he had dropped her at the Katana train station that evening. Her body was never found. For nearly 4 decades, the case remained classified as a missing person investigation. Westchester County did not formally treat her death as a homicide until 2018. Then came Susan Berman. On December 23, 2000, Durst's longtime friend, 55-year-old Susan Berman, the daughter of a Las Vegas organized crime figure, was found in her Benedict Canyon home in Beverly Hills with a single gunshot wound to the back of her head. She had been preparing to speak with New York investigators about Kathy's disappearance. An anonymous note sent to Beverly Hills police directing them to a body at Berman's address became a critical piece of evidence. In October 2001, the dismembered remains of 71-year-old Morris Black, Durst's neighbor in the rooming house, were found floating in Galveston Bay. Durst had been living in Galveston under the name Dorothy Siner, posing as a mute woman, paying rent in cash, and avoiding contact with his family. He was arrested on October 9, 2001, then jumped bail and vanished. He was caught on November 30th at a Wegmans grocery store in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, shoplifting a chicken salad sandwich. Despite having $37,000 in cash and 2 handguns in his possession. At trial in Galveston in 2003, defended by attorney Dick DeGuerin, Durst took the stand and testified that Black's death was accidental, the result of a struggle over Durst's own pistol. On November 11, 2003, the jury acquitted him. He later pleaded guilty on December 21, 2004, to bail jumping and evidence tampering, and served 3 years. The case that connected everything came through an HBO documentary. The 2015 series, The Jinx, directed by Andrew Jarecki, produced a handwriting comparison between a 1999 envelope Durst had sent to Berman and the anonymous note sent to police after her death. Both misspelled Beverly Hills the same way. And in the documentary's final moments, Durst was recorded on a live microphone in a bathroom, muttering to himself that he had taken all their lives. On March 14, 2015, FBI agents arrested Durst at a New Orleans hotel, where he was registered under a false name, one day before the finale of The Jinx aired. He was extradited to California. After a trial delayed by the pandemic, a Los Angeles jury convicted Durst on September 17, 2021, of first degree for Berman's death, with special circumstances for lying in wait and eliminating a witness. Judge Mark Wyndham sentenced him to life without parole on October 14th, calling the testimony presented at trial profoundly incriminating. 5 days later, a Westchester County grand jury indicted Durst for the second-degree taking of Kathy's life. Durst contracted COVID-19 shortly after sentencing, was hospitalized, and passed away on January 10, 2022, at the California Healthcare Facility in Stockton at the age of 78, because his appeal was still pending at the time of his death. The Berman conviction was automatically vacated under California's abatement ab initio doctrine. The Kathy indictment was rendered moot. Under the law, Robert Durst died without a standing conviction for any of the 3 deaths connected to his name. He left behind decades of suspicion, 3 separate investigations across 3 states, and a documentary confession that, in the end, carried no legal weight. The misspelled envelope would come back to haunt Durst. But that connection took 15 years and a documentary crew to surface. In the next case, the critical evidence was even more unexpected. A digital camera the suspect tried to destroy by running it through a washing machine. Jodi Arias. On June 9, 2008, friends of 30-year-old Travis Alexander arrived at his home in Mesa, Arizona, after days of unanswered calls. They found him in the shower of his master bathroom. He had been stabbed at least 27 times, his throat had been cut, and he had been shot in the forehead. He had been gone for 5 days. And then Jodi Arias, the woman who would eventually be convicted of taking his life, called one of those friends to ask if Travis was okay. Travis Victor Alexander was a Mormon motivational speaker and salesman for prepaid legal services. He met Arias, a freelance photographer from Salinas, California, at a 2006 conference in Las Vegas. They began a relationship in February 2007, and Arias converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. By the time the relationship ended, the dynamic between them had become deeply volatile, with each accusing the other of manipulative and controlling behavior. Detectives recovered the most critical piece of evidence from Alexander's own washing machine, a digital camera Arias had attempted to destroy. The memory card survived, and technicians recovered time-stamped photographs of Arias and Alexander together in his bedroom on June 4, 2008, the day he was found to have lost his life. One photograph, accidentally taken during the attack itself, placed Arias at the scene at the precise moment of violence. Confronted with this evidence, Arias offered Mesa Police Detective Esteban Flores 3 different versions of events. First, she said she had not been in Arizona at all. Second, she described 2 masked intruders who had taken Alexander's life while sparing hers, a story the media would later refer to as the Ninja Defense. After her arrest on July 15, 2008, in Eureka, California, she settled on a third account, self-defense, claiming Alexander had been physically abusive and had attacked her after she dropped his camera. Investigators found no evidence to support any of the first 2 accounts, and the forensic evidence contradicted several of her claims in the third. The trial began on January 2, 2013, before Maricopa County Superior Court Judge Sherry Stevens. Prosecutor Juan Martinez led the case for the state, with Kirk Nurmi and Jennifer Wilmot defending Arias. The proceedings were broadcast live on national television and became one of the most closely followed criminal trials in years. Arias testified for 18 days, describing the relationship in detail and maintaining her self-defense claim throughout. On May 8, 2013, the jury convicted her of first-degree premeditated taking of a life. The penalty phase ended in a deadlock, 8-4 in favor of death. A second penalty phase jury was impaneled in October 2014 and deliberated into March 2015, deadlocking again at 11-1 for death. Under Arizona law, that ended the capital proceeding. On April 13, 2015, Judge Stevens imposed natural life without the possibility of release, finding the act especially cruel and noting that Arias had destroyed evidence and gone to great lengths to conceal her involvement. She was also ordered to pay more than $32,000 in restitution. Arias appealed. In March 2020, the Arizona Court of Appeals upheld the conviction despite acknowledging what it called egregious prosecutorial misconduct by Martinez. The court found that Martinez had made improper arguments, engaged in inappropriate interactions with trial spectators, and exhibited a pattern of conduct that fell well below professional standards. Martinez was subsequently disbarred by the State Bar of Arizona in 2020. The Arizona Supreme Court declined further review in November of that year. As of 2025, Arias, 45 years old, is incarcerated at Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville, in the Lumley unit at a medium-low custody classification. She works as a library aide, assists with prison music programs, and sells artwork through an online platform. She has signaled an intention to pursue post-conviction relief on grounds of prosecutorial misconduct and excessive trial publicity. That effort remains in its early stages. Arias went through 3 different stories before settling on the version she took to trial. In the final case, the story is not about a single person, but about a couple, a husband and wife who used one partner as the face and the other as the force, and whose crime stretched across 3 states over 2 years. Gerald and Charlene Gallego. In November of 1980, a college student named Craig Miller, 22, and his girlfriend Mary Beth Sowers, 21, left a Sacramento fraternity party and were approached in the parking lot by a young woman who seemed friendly and unthreatening. A friend of Miller's, watching from nearby, noticed them getting into a car. He wrote down the license plate number. It was registered to the parents of a woman named Charlene Williams. Within days, both Miller and Sowers were found to have lost their lives. But the license plate led investigators to Charlene and her husband Gerald Gallego. And what unfolded from there revealed that Miller and Sowers were not their first victims. They were their last. Gerald Armand Gallego was born in 1946 in Sacramento. His father was the first man executed in Mississippi's gas chamber, and Gerald himself had accumulated 7 felony convictions before the age of 32. Charlene Adele Williams came from a starkly different background. The daughter of a supermarket chain executive, with a reported IQ of 160 and 2 prior marriages. They met in September 1977 and married bigamously under a false name in Reno in September 1978. Between September 1978 and November 1980, the Gallegos abducted and took the lives of at least 10 people across California, Nevada, and Oregon. Their method relied on Charlene as the lure. She would approach victims, often young women, in public spaces, offering drugs, party invitations, or work distributing flyers. The victims would get into the couple's 1973 Dodge van, where Gerald was waiting. Several of the victims were teenagers. Their names were Rhonda Scheffler, Kippy Vaught, Brenda Judd, and Sandra Colley. All were taken from public locations, a Sacramento shopping center and the Washoe County Fair in Reno. The harm done to these young victims was described in court filings as deliberate, prolonged, and premeditated. Their lives were taken, and their remains were not recovered for months. The adult victims included Stacy Redican, 21, and Karen Twiggs, 20, abducted from a Sacramento mall and bludgeoned with a hammer in Limerick Canyon, Nevada. Linda Aguilar, 21 and pregnant, was taken in Oregon, beaten, and buried alive. Virginia Moschel, 34, a Sacramento bartender, was strangled. And then came Miller and Sowers, the final victims, both shot. It was that license plate number from the fraternity party that ended it. The Gallegos fled east, and FBI agents arrested them on November 17, 1980, at a Western Union office in Omaha, Nebraska, where Charlene's parents had wired them money. Charlene gave birth in custody in January 1981. The legal proceedings that followed were lengthy and complex. In a 1982 plea deal, Charlene pleaded guilty in Nevada to 2 counts of second degree for the Redican and Twiggs deaths, and agreed to testify against Gerald in both California and Nevada, in exchange for a sentence of 16 years and 8 months. Her deal protected her from further prosecution in California, Nevada, and Oregon. Several outlets have mischaracterized this arrangement as California releasing her. In reality, the plea was entered in Nevada, and the protection from additional charges was a condition of her testimony. Gerald, who represented himself at trial, was convicted in Sacramento Superior Court in June 1983 for the Miller and Sowers deaths and sentenced to death. He was then extradited to Pershing County, Nevada, convicted of the Redican and Twiggs deaths in June 1984, and sentenced to death a second time. His Nevada death sentence was overturned on procedural grounds in 1999. But a new jury again recommended death. He remained on death row through the end of his life. Gerald Gallego passed away from advanced rectal cancer on July 18, 2002, at Renown Regional Medical Center in Reno, at the age of 56, while held at Ely State Prison. Charlene was released on July 17, 1997, from the Warm Springs Correctional Center in Carson City after serving her full 16 years and 8 months. Early release credits had been renegotiated during her incarceration to ensure she served the entire term. She returned to the Sacramento area, resumed her maiden name Williams, and has lived privately ever since. In a 2013 interview with a Sacramento television station, she expressed remorse and claimed she had tried to save some of the victims' lives. She maintained that she had not personally taken any of their lives. As of 2025, Charlene Williams lives privately in the Sacramento area. She remains free, unsupervised, and unindicted. In every one of these cases, the person responsible was someone the people around them trusted without question. The courts reached their verdicts. The records remain. Thanks for watching. Click here for the next video.